Hello, I'm James Tucker and I'm an actor, and this is my first time hosting A Bit Lit, and I'm joined by my friend Dugald Bruce-Lockhart, who is an actor as well.
Greetings.
Hello, thank you for sitting down with us this afternoon.
Oh, it's great to be here.
The films begin with me apparently asking you just to give us an overview of yourself, if you would, a little bit of an introduction.
Yes, indeed. So I'm an actor. I graduated from RADA in 1994. And my first job was with the RSC, which was very lucky. And I toured the world for 12 months and made many good friends. And then went on to tour 4 or 5 years later with a company called Propeller, which is actually where I first saw Jimmy doing 12th Night, playing Olivia at the Watermill. And then I got to join it the year after that. I joined it the year before and then missed that show, which was wonderful, then joined it again and toured the world for about 15 years. And then ended up becoming the associate director of Propeller and took over directing a couple of productions, including Midsummer Night's Dream and The Comedy of Errors, which of course you were in. We had great fun in the rehearsal room in Brixton, and we took that around the world. And then I ended up doing Mamma Mia for a couple of years, which is where I wrote my first novel, The Lizard, which I do actually have. I
have it as well.
I have a copy too. Which is based on well, we'll come to that in a bit. But yes, so I wrote my first novel then, which has now been published, and I'm working on the second. And we've just moved house. Here we are in Hayes in Kent. And yeah, lovely to be here.
You look very well organised in the background for somebody that's just moved house.
That's it. If I turn the camera the other way, it's just, no, it really is. I won't, but yeah, it's a mess. There's pictures and stuff, but no, I think we're settling in, so.
Good.
I've taken down the pool from the garden because we moved in on the hottest day of the year. The pool was just out there and all the grass was completely white. And now it's like a forest, but I haven't got a lawnmower, so.
No, we're seeing the change, aren't we? So much at the moment.
Yeah.
Now look, two things I didn't know about you until earlier this year, that you're born in Fiji, and that you have written your first novel, this thriller, The Lizard. Which had some really good reviews. Let's have a look. This impressive debut is written with huge verve, fast-paced, atmospheric and gripping, pitch-perfect escapism, intrigue, action and excitement. And I felt all of those whilst reading them. I didn't know you had a novel in you.
Do you know, I mean, they say everybody has a novel in them. And I've been thinking about writing. I mean, I used to, when I was about 7 or 8, I used to tell stories. My brother and I at nighttime would lie in bed when we lived in Cyprus, and we'd tell each other stories. And mine was nearly always about a peregrine falcon who ate baked beans that used to fart a lot. And that was always the kind of the climax and the gig of the story was, when would he fart? Would it get him out of trouble? And my brother used to tell a story about, I can't remember his first name, it was a cabbage. He used to tell a story about a cabbage. So I've always told stories. I've always written short stories. And this story is actually, the Lizard is based on, it's based on a trip I took in 1988 to the island of Paros when I was at uni. And I went on my own and I went mad. I did go mad. I went feral. I slept rough, went feral for 3 months, ended up being half chased off the island. And for about 30 years, this event has sat with me. And I kept thinking, there's got to be a story in there somewhere. Somewhere there's got to be a story in there. And it was only in the last couple of years, I think when I was doing Mamma Mia and I had the time suddenly, and I thought, in fact, my wife Penny introduced me to a writer's workshop, and I'd written 3 chapters, started in 2006. So for years I've been tinkering, but it was a very, very, very early form. Anyway, I guess I did have this novel in me.
And did the story change a lot from the beginning?
Yes, hugely. To begin with, I think what I wanted to do was just kind of record it, because I did actually keep a diary at the time, which I lost. I ended up throwing it in the bin. I can't remember why, out in Athens somewhere. But it started off in the third person. The lead character was called Adam, and he started on the aeroplane, waking up in an aeroplane, hammered, lost his trousers, thinking, where am I? And he backtracks and thinks, hang on a second, okay, it's so-and-so's birthday. And he ends up in Athens. He spends a night on a park bench, gets pickpocketed, loses his passport, has to go to the embassy shut. And he gets himself caught up in a kind of 1001 Nights kind of nightmare scenario. But then, and it was very autobiographical. I really was drawing on what I remembered. And then I met a guy at a barbecue, a published author himself. And I said to him that I was writing this thing, and he said, no. If you want to sell a book, you've got to include a murder. And I was like, well, but I didn't murder anybody. He said, make it up. I thought, yes, make it up. So I then got rid of all my autobiographical stuff. I guess in film terms, you'd call it killing your darlings. So I killed all my darlings, and then I started again, absolutely from scratch, and then wrote it in the first person. And then suddenly things completely changed. And yes, so it did. It changed radically. I spent maybe 15 years tinkering with this idea. And then once I met Jeff, who's my agent out in New York and also my writing mentor, I wrote it in 9 months, which is so 16 years on my own, kind of in and out the drawer. No, thanks, it's terrible, it's shit, it's awful. And then 9 months with somebody else going, this is good, try this, try that. And sort of helping me with ideas and checking holes. And yeah, I mean, it's thanks to him really that it came out.
As an actor writing, do you approach it in a different way to someone else, in the way that we're so used to getting up and standing up and improvising, or thinking about settings and backgrounds of characters? There's quite a few characters in there.
Yes.
Some of them we don't see, but it's
no, that's right.
Well for them, and a broad spectrum of people.
Yes, well, I mean, a lot of the characters are mishmashes of people I met out there. In fact, I went back to Paros maybe 3 times over the next 5-8 years, and each time I had a different experience. So it's all mingled together. And I'll come to that in a second, but interesting, your question about being an actor and writing it. I mean, people do say that actors have good dialogue. They have a good ear for dialogue. And of course, dialogue can go on if it's not, if you don't keep it tight, it can go on, you can start to waffle. And I think we're quite good actors in rehearsal going, no, that's too much, I can do this with a look. And of course, in writing terms, you have to write that with a look, because you can't do the whole with a look thing. I think being an actor, a bit like needing a director, the harder thing when you're writing is getting the overall arc of the thing and not getting lost, keeping the story moving forward, but filling it with just enough detail to set the scene, but not too much. And the book that I read at the time, recommended to me by Simon Williams, actor friend of mine, father of Tam, of course we know very well between us. He said, get Stephen King's book on writing. And I did. And in it, he talks about kill all the adjectives. You basically want to write a sentence that is just enough code to trigger the imagination in the reader. So don't write the scene, don't write the whole setting, just a couple of lines or a word even will trigger it. And so it becomes a sort of, what's the word where you put voices in someone else's head, of sort of, you become like a ventriloquist. So you basically, just the seeds of ideas, and they do it. And I suppose in acting terms, it's about not acting the whole story, but just acting from moment to moment and let the audience get the picture. So don't act the picture, don't act the character, just act the intention. And the same thing applies to writing, weirdly.
And did you know the sort of audience that you were writing for?
I think so. I mean,
Do you start off by thinking, who am I writing for? No. I think weirdly, well, 16 years ago, I started writing it for myself. And then I met this chap and said, if you actually want to sell it, you've got to think more about what genre is it? And I was thinking, well, like a good film, like a good play, it can be any genre. Does it have to be a genre? He said, well, if you want to sell it, yes, it's got to be a genre. And of course, my impetus to write it wasn't to sell it, but if you're going to write a book and go to that trouble, you might as well give it a chance. So it went from being more literary, I guess, to eventually a thriller. It became a thriller. And to begin with, it was an action thriller. But then in the end, I think we decided on suspense thriller, even though it starts off like that and then goes into quite wild action sequences. So it was sort of a bit of both. And to that end, I remember thinking, well, this needs to really be towards uni age, upwards of, I don't know, I was imagining it between kind of sort of early 20s to 65, something like that, roughly. So basically, a big, but funnily enough, my aunt, who was a barrister up in Scotland, worked for Brodie's. She was one of the first female advocates in Scotland. She's retired now, but she's very much a Jane Austen type, and she's a prolific reader. I gave it to her just to see what she would think. And she told me that she woke up 3 o'clock in the morning one night, couldn't sleep, so she decided to start my novel. And she read it. By 8 o'clock in the morning, she'd read the whole thing. She said she was completely hooked, and it was absolutely not her cup of tea.
And I took that as a wonderful review because there is violence in it. There's some fairly graphic bits, but so, and then I thought, okay, well, it's probably not her demographic I'm writing for, but then others I've given it to of a similar age have loved it. So I think I'm getting the feeling it could be a bit of a Marmite book.
Oh, I don't know. Yeah. Before I read it, I just struggled through an 800-page contemporary novel, and it'd taken me months, even though we were in lockdown. And then I picked up yours, and it really is a page turner. And once it starts, it doesn't stop for the character. We should talk about your protagonist, Alistair.
Yes,
it does. Without giving too much away, I guess, because it starts off with you or Alistair talking about being in prison, having taken a man's life.
Yeah. Yes, I always wanted to set it in Paris where it's set, and I'll come back to that later. And I kept thinking, well, what's the motivation for him going there in the first place? Just going on holiday seems a bit random. And I knew there was going to be this murder eventually. He was going to have to be on the run. And I always wanted to write a story about an academic who has to rely on his hunter-gatherer instinct. I love the themes that went with that. Not a dweeb as such, because some people who've perhaps not enjoyed it so much go, how does this guy go from being this to being that? And actually my point is that under the right circumstances, as in war, one can do anything. And if you're not prepared to buy into that, then read something else. I mean, that sounds a bit defensive, but in a sense, anybody can do anything if the pressure is enough. But I thought, well, how do I get the premise that the hook is he goes there to get over a breakup, meets this guy without giving too much away. And then I'd recently read Donna Tartt's The Goldfinch, not the Goldfinch, Secret History, which was her first book. And in it, on page 1, she starts off something like, of course, we didn't know we were going to murder Bunny when blah, 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 blah. And I thought, well, she does that on page 1. I'm going to do the same. So I thought, well, let's write it in retrospect, giving it a framework narrative, which also opens it up to sequels, prequels, which will, again, come to you later. And I found that suddenly, I mean, that the prologue as it stands now took me a long while to find. To begin with, it was a scene later on in the book, which is sort of a classic storytelling film technique. You write something kind of mysterious. You go, oh, I wonder when we're going to pick up with this. But in the end, I decided to write something more philosophical. He was a philosophy student, so it made sense that he talks about Kierkegaard. Life can only be understood backwards, but it has to be lived forwards. And I liked, and so I brought in philosophy, and then the idea that this philosopher becomes a reptile, becomes like a lizard, like the antagonist, and it ends up becoming the man he thinks Ellie wants him to be, but just goes too far. Yeah. So I'm rattling off loads.
No, you're not. I really like the development of Alistair, and he's questioning himself a lot through the novel about what his capabilities are, but sometimes it's do or die. So he has to make those decisions.
Yes.
You take him through really well all of those decisions, all of those processes of thinking through what the alternative might be.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. There was a couple of things that I missed. I gave it to William Boyd, who I'd met, who weirdly, his first book, A Good Man in Africa, I read in Africa, in the house where he set the book at 18 years old. I didn't know this. My parents gave it to me. I read it in a house just north of Ibadan, and the final scene takes place in this house. And of course, William Boyd was born in Accra and spent time in Ghana, Nigeria, and he sets it in a sort of fictional West African country. But I remember reading this and being blown away by it and found it so funny. And then eventually met him through Propeller, and said, I'm writing this story. I'd love you to read it one day. Anyway, long story, he read it and he very kindly gave me a lovely critique for the front cover. But the only thing he said in it, he said he enjoyed it and he loved it. He said, don't you think Alistair would put in a call to his parents at some point? He's 20 years old. I thought, yes. So coming back to your point of making sure that every decision he made is because it's the only one left.
Yeah.
Because he's all about logic and philosophy, he has to try and the intellect tries to work out, well, that's all I can do. And eventually he doesn't even go into that thought process. He becomes more instinctive, like Ricky. Yeah. So I love that whole idea of logic and making sure that everything is covered as a writer. Because otherwise I go, well, why doesn't he just do that? So I spend a lot of time thinking about that. And when I go on my walks before writing, I would be thinking about, okay, where are the holes? And having someone like Jeff, you're meant to read it and going, you said this here, how does that work there? And now, having been through that experience on the next book, I go backs and forwards all the time, because the next one is far more complicated, far more of a psychological thriller, a chess game. Whereas this one was, it starts here and it ends there, and in a sense it's quite linear and sort of easy without making contradictions. But you just got to make sure that you don't at any point have the audience go, well, why doesn't he just get on a plane and leave? So he's got to lose his passport, he's got to lose his money, and then psychologically he's got to go into a dark place where some options become psychologically impossible.
Yeah, yeah. But
and of course,
32 years ago is a really different place. My memories of Greece, trying to make a phone call from there, not easy at all.
No, no. And I think, and people have asked about, why was it set in 88 specifically? Well, that happened to be when I went, and I have a very clear, I've been since then, but I always went there when it was still drachma.
Yes.
I never went when there was the internet. And part of me, as an actor now and as a human now living in this time, I slightly am wistful about the days before internet, because for me, and one of the titles was anonymous. I love the idea of anonymity. And back in the 80s, you step out of your front door and you really were anonymous. You could go for a walk and anything could happen. And you had to talk to people if you wanted to find something out, and you had to rely on your wits. Now, if it was set now, Hastings would be on his phone the whole time. So then somebody would have to steal his phone. Then he'd have to engineer it that he couldn't go to an internet shop or ask for somebody else's Google Maps. And all of a sudden, adventure just becomes a very different thing. So people writing about it now have to invent all sorts of things and clever, and I just didn't want to do that. I wanted it to be an out and out, somebody relying on their wits and not technology. And I think in the second book, I've set it 4 years later, again, to avoid that, although it's right on the cusp. The third book is going to be current, and that's going to be a much harder, different beast, because I've finally got to accept.
All thrillers.
Yes, all thrillers, all featuring Alistair.
Right.
Alistair Hastings.
Yes, you sort of you leave it hanging at the end of this novel, The Lizard.
Yeah.
So it's a continuation of where Alistair is.
Yes, it's so. Of course, I can't give it away. I have to shoot you. But it can be read on its own.
Yeah.
But without giving it away, it's the premise for it kicks off where he left off. There's unfinished business that needs to be revisited.
Good. I'm glad. I want to revisit it.
Can I give you the hook line for the new story? Yes, I think I can. He's working. It's 1994, 5 years after. He's working in a telesales office, waiting to start his new teaching English in Japan job in the autumn. It's been pushed back, and he gets a phone call from what he thinks was somebody he was trying to sell advertising space to. Greek, anonymous, says, "Sorry to trouble you, but just want to let you know that your 5-year-old boy has been injured in a car accident in Athens." And Alistair thinks, "What son?" And they're phoning him because the family don't want anything to deal with him. The woman that Alistair had this thing with back then is happy without Alistair in life. They're contacting him because there might have been foul play. The police might be in touch just to let you know. And of course, he starts to panic, thinks, well, what? And a child? How did this happen? Why didn't I know about it? And he goes back to Greece to find out. And it kicks off.
Will it visit some of the other characters in this novel, The Lizard?
Yes, without giving it away, yes. Yes, it will.
Can we talk about some of those people in a roundabout way without giving too much away? But there's some fantastic criminals and policemen and tourists.
So the antagonist, Ricky, it's funny because I had lots of lovely reviews. One of the less lovely reviews from Australia, had some wonderful reviews from Australia because they published it, Bloomsbury published it there. And I think one of the reviewers was confused and thought that apparently, I didn't know this, the Lizard is a nickname for a kind of guy that hangs out in certain bars and behaves I know Lizard Lounge, obviously, but a certain kind of character. And she was a bit annoyed that it was clearly because of that. And she'd sort of missed the point that Lizard, cold-blooded, on a rock, he's got a lizard tattoo. There's all sorts of other reasons it's called the Lizard and not that. But this guy, Ricky, he's actually an amalgamation. Well, he's an invention. They're all inventions. But when I was out there in 88, there was a guy who was actually English who was about 26. And he did nothing but drink beer. He was one of the gang that I met out there. And he was very cool, very laid back. And I remember him saying to me on the beach once, he says, Dugald, listen, if you want to pick up girls, you've got to stop trying too hard. Get yourself a book, sit in the corner of a bar and ignore them, and they will come to you. I remember thinking, oh, okay, good. And then he also told me that you can drink as much beer as you like, and it will never get you fat, never make you fat, provided you don't eat. And I thought, okay. And he was, but it's weirdly based on, actually, the idea comes from, I had a friend of mine when I was 7. I went to school in Cyprus called Darren Williams, and his brother was a sort of hero. He was 11, 12, and used to wear these. He was an excellent swimmer, good-looking guy. The kind of thing as a young boy you look up to and kind of hero worship, and he just had it all. Right? And I remember thinking that there's that sort of feeling of Alistair, and then the older Australian guy, the guy he'd like to be, the alpha male he'd like to see himself as. So, but he morphed all the time as I wrote him, and I sort of wanted to. Oh yeah, and so there's other characters. There's Roland, Leo. I worked with a guy a bit like Leo when I was built on the campsite, when I was doing building site work in Greece. I did actually meet a guy the very first day, like Roland. I sat there going, I'm on my own. How do I go out? How do I do anything? If I'm on my own, I've got to hold on to my passport and my rucksack the whole time. And I went swimming and met this guy. He wasn't called Roland, and he wasn't Scottish, but he gave me the lowdown on how to get work out there, and he let me share his tent so I could put stuff in it. So all these characters were sort of based on people that I met. But
you go to jail?
Say again?
Did you go to jail?
I never went to.
You didn't. Well, the description of him in the prison is really good.
I went into that police station. I have spent the night in a police cell when I was at drama school. It was not my fault. It was all fine. Talk about that another time. I have no criminal record, but I did spend the night in a police cell. It was to sober us up, I think, in a single cell, and very much like the one I described.
It's all very useful.
Sorry?
It's all very useful.
It's exactly. The police were laughing at the time because they found out we were actors, and they said, is this your research for the bill and stuff? But actually, anyway, that's another whole story. But I was effectively chased off the island though, because I'd been hanging out with some guys who'd got caught stealing, and they were having fights with these Turkish lads, and I was very often brought in to kind of break up the fights. But eventually, they were looking after various things for me, including my passport, and they got chased off the island. One of them jumped off a ferry, being chased by the police 30 feet off into the harbour, got arrested. They were kicked off. I had to do a runner because I hadn't been staying in this place. They had my stuff, so I was part of the group as far as the police were concerned. So I left, and I went to go meet a friend of mine who was coming over from England in Athens, and I spent 3 days sleeping on a bench, got a stinking cold, met up with him, and then came back to Paris, but went to a completely different side of the island and basically hid from the police. They never caught me, or they never caught up with me. But I hadn't technically done anything wrong. It was my association with these guys that had done that. I say that now. It's true. I was innocent, my lord. I was. Yeah. So trying to think of other characters. Ellie. People ask me, so who's Ellie? Ellie is Alistair's ex. Can't give it away more than that. She's a mixture of all sorts of people that I've known, girlfriends, ex-girlfriends over the years. And then eventually, when you get really immersed in it, I suppose a bit like acting, you forget that it's you doing it. You're just in a situation.
Yeah.
And therefore certain things become useful to tell, and you start not to try and write a story that's already been written down in acting terms. You don't try and play the character. You just go from moment to moment. And Stephen King has this great advice. Some people like to plan their novels. I think you've got to have an ending, but plan it all the way through, sketch it out. But what he likes to do is he likes to choose his protagonists, stick them in a situation out of which they've got to fight. And when they've got out of that, you give them another predicament. And so that's what I did. I thought, well, let's put him here. And then suddenly one thing and another, which is slightly different from the way thrillers are written nowadays, which is you basically sort of fuck with the reader's mind for about 20 chapters, going all over the place, and then confuse the shit out of them. And then in the last 2 chapters, tie it all together and make them feel clever. And you go, phew. But for me, personally, as a reader, I find that rather frustrating. It's not an excuse. I like to enjoy the journey. I don't want to wait 20 chapters before I get to something I can understand. So I know it's not very now to write in a linear way, but at least I find that you can enjoy it a bit like a train journey. You know, the ending is important, but actually it's getting there on the train is the fun thing about going on a train. Whereas if they put a cloak over your head and you're going to get from here to Glasgow and you suddenly wake up in Glasgow not knowing how you got there, well, where's the fun in that?
Exactly. And there's an audiobook which I haven't heard, but you've recorded yourself.
Yes.
Audiobook. So you've played all the characters. Is that how it's worked, or do you not feel as you're reading them that you're necessarily giving a performance?
I think if I had really thought it through and thought I'm going to end up narrating this, I might have written certain characters out, because there's Albanians, there's Greeks, there's Dutch, there's various kinds of Swede. There's, but actually, I went to a Greek school, so I speak enough Greek to be able to sound like an Englishman doing a fair turn at Greek. Albanian, I don't, but luckily he was a Greek Albanian. I have a natural tendency to speak very quickly, and I've done about 20 or 30 audiobooks, but I'm always, you know, my wife, my parents, when they were alive, everyone was always saying, slow down, Dugald, slow down, you talk too fast. And I just operated at a very quick speed and as a narrator, you have to slow down, but and what happens is, as you start to read it, you start to speed up. And so if nobody's telling you to slow down, you end up going, tick, 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 tick. And I think, you know, for the next book, would I read it again? Would I read the next one? I probably have to, having read Alistair in the first one, to get continuity. But I will practice slowing down.
And a few less Albanians.
And a few less Albanians.
You're very international, having been born in Fiji and travel around the world. It sounds like a great history of life so far.
Yeah, it was a wonderful. I mean, I don't remember Fiji. Both my brother and I were born in Suva. I was 68, he was 69, and I don't remember it. We left from when we were three and two. My brother went back for his 50th last year, or the year before last, and I do long to go there. We got quite close on some propeller tours, got to New Zealand, but then I was brought up in Cyprus and Vienna and Lagos, Nigeria, and Bonn. My parents were in the Foreign Office, so so they had it. Language and travel was very much in their blood, and I think having travelled a lot, it made sense to write a book that was sort of a travel thriller as well.
Yeah. Now we spend all this time sitting at home.
Not now here we are.
Too far.
Here we are at home. Yeah, I mean, it was very weird doing the book launch, which was supposed to be at Daunt's, you know, with champagne and nerve-wracking speech from the gallery, and you know, everyone signing books, and I did it online, which was terrifying, because you see yourself on a Facebook Live, but even with Zoom there's interaction, but on Facebook Live you can't do that. You're just talking to a camera, and as a news feed here, questions pop up, which you try and answer, which I then have to do this. Yes, I read that, and I think it was very funny.
Jokes?
Yeah, well, no, I didn't tell you jokes.
No idea how you go down.
Exactly, yes, but you have no idea how well it's going. You see people joining up there, and but my son, my 5-year-old, did come in halfway through, having been very good and sat in the other room watching television. He finally came through, and I was reading an extract, crucial moment in chapter 3, and the door opened behind the screen and says, "Mummy, I need a poo," because my wife is sitting here off camera making sure. It says, "I need a poo," and then I said, "Everybody, he needs a poo." Of course, this became kind of the highlight for the launch. Yes, so it's strange. The whole sort of Zoom interaction, Zoom life is different. But then I think the book is, well, coming back to your thing about who's it for, I'm longing to get it out to the university ages, sort of 20 to 30. And having William Boyd and Charles Cumming, who are two of my favorite authors, Charles Cumming, fantastic spy thriller, gave me these wonderful notices for the book. And I think that in terms of the style with William, yes, and I think that some of the people who are big William Boyd fans, of which I am one of the ultimate, I've read everything, and I've read everything Charlie Cummings has written, is that it's not really a William Boyd kind of novel. And so I think some people might have gone in looking for the William Boyd novel in there. so thinking, you know, when you're thinking about, because having those two writers, you know, give your book accolades, it's beyond belief. I can't never imagine that they would be endorsing my first novel. But it's funny, isn't it? Because once you've written it, you then got to think, well, who's going to read it? Does the market depend on the quote? Does the market depend on who the bookseller gets it to? And of course, all I'm really worried about is, you know, does the story make sense? Are there any holes? And is it fun? And you talked about page turning, and I did want to write a page turner, and I'm very pleased that the Guardian said it was a reader to sitting page turner, and a lot of people said they read it in one sitting or two sittings or over a weekend, and I'm glad, because I think if a book isn't a page turner, you're slightly stuffed because you've got to turn the page at some point.
Dugald, these films finish as we're drawing to a close, asking the guest what literature means to them. Would you have any thoughts on that? Whether it's a helpful or unhelpful word? What it means to
literature,
them?
I think literature, a sort of a knee-jerk reaction to the word literature, makes me think of my parents' bookshelf with the Graham Greene and the Ford Madox Ford and poetry. Literature to me feels like something. I mean, I did German literature and French literature at university and did English at A-level and love writing and love reading. Literature makes me think of my A-level homework I've got to do and an assignment on Der Schimmelreiter, the Dikemaster in English. But I think literary, as in literary, how do you say it? Literary is a useful word, like literary novels. It's part of the speak now. You know, is it a cozy? Is it a thriller? Is it a literary piece? But literature should be embraced, but it has the whiff somehow. Not a bad thing for me, but I can imagine you say literature to a 15-year-old and they will get the whiff of academia. And if you go, this is a great piece of literature, they're more likely to go, okay, I'll get back to Angry Birds. Whereas you could say, this is a fantastic story. Sorry?
Or I'd like a page turner.
Yeah, or I'd like a page turner. But I'd like to think that my novel is literary because I enjoy words, I enjoy sentences, I enjoy painting pictures with words, as long as you don't overdo it. As long as you're telling the story, again, it comes back to acting. And is it literature? I mean, I'd love people to think, you know, call it literature. I'd love to see it in the literature section of a bookshop. So it is literature. How I feel about literature, to me, it feels like more of a. It has that slight scent of academia.
It's different for everyone, isn't it? Yeah. Felt quite.
What do you think about it?
Well, forensic is the way I thought about it. And
say again.
Forensic. Food. That it in my head it holds up things if I'm trying to apply it to, say, a novel. But I love the idea that literature can also mean what's written on the side of a tin of baked beans. And it doesn't have to be in depth. It doesn't have to be long. I suppose my history is that it's always felt, like you say, academic. And I just want to get on with the novel. And as you said, to see the arc of something and then go back over the literature at the end.
Yes, absolutely. And I wonder how often, because it's funny, because we keep like the bookshelf behind me. I've got all these books that I've read. And I suppose one keeps books because it's a diary of certain moments in your life. How often we actually ever read them again, I don't know. I don't think I've really ever read a book a second time. I've seen films twice, but not a book. And it's odd, isn't it? Because for us who like reading, why wouldn't you read it again? But it just shows in the end, ultimately, the reason you read it is for the story. It's got to be the story. And if you know the story, then you're reading it for different reasons. I mean, I've read Bill Bryson's History of Nearly Everything, History of the World. It's one beautifully written, basically starting from the dawn of time to where we are now. A brief history of nearly everything or something. But I reread it every year. I come back to it, I dip into it, because there's so many facts, I forget them. But that's a sort of fact-finding mission. But it's funny how I don't personally revisit works that I've considered beautifully written, because actually if I know the story, I'd like a fresh story. But I've started loads of books in the last 10 years that I don't get beyond about page 60 because I'm just not interested in the way they're written at the time. So it's a real fusion of the two.
Well, you can hand your books over to your children.
Yes, exactly. Yes, there we are. There they are.
Waiting. Dougie, it's been really great seeing you and talking to you.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations again on it. It's a really beautiful, brutal book and hugely entertaining. And I look forward to the next ones. Yes, absolutely. I should let you know as soon as the ink is dry. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Yeah, great to see you. Till soon. Bye bye. Bye bye. Bye bye.